I've spent my entire career in front of the camera, I think, doing two things. One of which, well, both of which I think I've succeeded. I've tried to surprise people. I've tried to do something unconventional that they don't expect. I've tried to say or do something somewhere which makes people sit up and think, ooh, that was funny, let's say, or that was amusing, or what a sense of humour, which of course happened in the Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun. Scaramanga has a great sense of humour. It's lethal, but he has a sense of humour. So not an ordinary thug, you see. There's the difference. Unexpected, unconventional.
I lay quiet, looking out onto my eyelashes in an agony of delightful anticipation.
Listen to them, the children of the night. What music
From the D&E Studios, welcome to the sexiest show on the internet, the Dracula Podcast. I am your host, Lawrence Burgess, or LB for short. Thank you to Adam Stover, Rob, and Martha of Southgate Media, and most of all, you for listening. We aim to bring you thoughtful, stimulating media, reviewing the films, books, music, and plays that make Stoker's creation so beloved, the criticism to inform your purchasing decisions, interesting guests, and the needs of our communities. You can contact us everywhere, on Facebook, on Twitter, Dracula Audio, no spaces. You can find us on Libsyn, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher. We are literally everywhere around the friendly interwebs. We are also brought to you once again by the Foxborough in Charleston, West Virginia, the industry leader in scoring, multi-track audio recording, mixing, mastering, and graphic design. If you have a production need, please call Greg Hunt at the Foxborough at 1007 Bigley Avenue, Suite 319, Charleston, West Virginia, 25302. If you notice, I'm not in my usual chipper self this week, and that is for a very specific reason. This week we lost one of the greats in film, in Christopher Lee, who passed away at 93. I am deeply saddened by this. It's strange. We're so disconnected, but I have shed tears over two celebrities. One was the passing of Heath Ledger, and two was the passing of Christopher Lee. I know a lot of folks say that he lived a very full life, and nothing could be truer. And he was 93 years old, but still, Christopher Lee is one of the greats, not only in cinema, but in the world. He was an ambassador of education, art, language, multiculturalism, someone who broke barriers, and someone who continued to be productive even in their later life. It's sad that most of you only know him from Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. My advice to you is to dig a little bit deeper. You'll find that Star Wars and Lord of the Rings are just very, very minuscule points in a very large and diverse career. I am deeply saddened. It goes without saying that we will be having a tribute episode to Christopher Lee by itself. When that gets done, I'm not sure. Mostly because I'm not really sure what to say or how to say it. All I know is that if anyone listening to this podcast is in connection with Christopher Lee, a family member, a friend, even a fan like me, please know you have my deepest sympathies. He will not be forgotten. Those words are used so much, and often not true. Someone will not be forgotten. But in Sir Christopher's case, it's true. Someone who leaves such an impact, such a diverse, long-standing impact on cinema. I mean, the man was 93 years old. 93 years old. Just living that long is a feat in itself. And I don't have the time to list all of Sir Christopher's accomplishments. It would take me days, weeks perhaps, to list them all out and what he's done. If I had 1% of the life of Sir Christopher Lee, I will have lived perhaps the fullest life a person can live. So take those numbers to the bank. And you can also take it to the bank that Christopher Lee will be missed not only by me, but by millions around the world. I'm at a loss for words, really. Sir Christopher used to say that there are no giants left in cinema. There are stars, but there are no giants. The Douglas Fairbanks, the Mary Pickfords, the real giants in cinema. Well, Sir Christopher, you were one of the giants in cinema. And strangely enough, this man really didn't get the credit he deserved here in America. When you mention the name Christopher Lee, those who would recognize the name would associate it with Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, which is garbage. It's not right. And also, Sir Christopher Lee, perhaps on this podcast, is associated with Dracula. And that's all. And that's a shame. And I am deeply moved, and not in a good way, by Sir Christopher's passing. I feel like the world lost something wonderful. But fortunately, for all of us, he left us a lot of paintings to view. And for that, I am thankful.
You have to convince the audience that what you're doing, or what you're saying, has a degree of possibility or probability about it. They've got to believe it and take away the special effects and the stunts and everything. As an actor or an actress, you have to make the audience believe that this could be possible.
All right, folks, we're back at the Dracula podcast. We'll be inserting quotes from Sir Christopher throughout the episode, and again, we will be having a tribute episode to Christopher Lee, so don't worry about that. The reason why it's not this episode is because, honestly, I need time to collect my thoughts. I don't know what to say. I honestly don't know what to say. And leading into that bad segue, you all have quite a bit to say to me. And I appreciate all the kind comments and the sweetness, and I can't unfortunately read all these on the air because I honestly don't have time. Cindy in South Charleston, West Virginia writes, "Why do you think the Miami Hurricane football team sucks? Haven't they won a lot of championships?" I don't want to answer that because this is not the place for it, and I'll start raving and swearing and cussing, and none of you want to hear that. And if you do want to hear that, that is in a completely different venue. Thank you for emailing. Mark in Washington, D.C. writes, "Lawrence, you do such a great job on the Dracula podcast. Why don't you cover other TV shows?" Well, thank you, Mark, for listening. A few reasons. One, I'm a very busy person, and I only have so many hours per week. One, to compose this podcast, and two, to watch the shows. And that goes into value and time. The main reason why I don't do other shows is because I don't like them. I don't like things from the CW. I don't buy into Marvel and DC. I don't buy into the CSIs. I'm very picky on what I watch per week, and I should be. I'm a discerning consumer. I don't have time to watch 56,000 hours of TV per week. I got a life, trying to make some cabbage. If I had the opportunity to do another show, it would be Hannibal on NBC because of its quality. In fact, Hannibal on NBC is the only other show that can match Penny Dreadful in its stylized storytelling, its narrative, its performances, its direction, and its continued success, one after the other. As for other shows, I can't. I've been asked quite a bit to appear on other podcasts, but I told them for the health of their shows, it's not wise. It's not wise for me to get going on a rant, and before I go on another one, I wish to thank you once again, Mark, for listening to this podcast. Thank you. And before we get into Casting Dread, don't forget, folks, that we are back once again with John Johnson in the fourth of our 8-part history into the Universal Monsters franchise. We touch on one of my favorite films, The Raven, and you all should be talking about it. If you haven't watched The Raven, do so, and The Bride of Frankenstein. So don't forget to tune in at the end of the show, and there'll be much more where that came from. Alright, folks, here it is. This is our subcast, entitled Casting Dread, The Penny Dreadful Show. The 7th episode of the 2nd season of Penny Dreadful is entitled Little Scorpion. It is written by John Logan and directed by Brian Kirk. There are a couple words to sum up this episode. 1 is layers. 2 is kindness. Again, the focus is on kindness and friendship, and that's why Penny Dreadful works. Does Little Scorpion continue the trend of Penny Dreadful topping itself every week? The answer is yes. You get more revelations of Sembeni, Vanessa, Ethan, and when I say layers, we'll be touching on that a little later. As the show is a very large character study on duality and layers, let's start with Lily. Lily wants to be more public. Lily wants to live. Lily has been cooped up in a box for some time, and Victor necessarily doesn't like that. But he will accept it. What does Lily do? She goes out with Dorian Gray to the Wax Museum, and she also goes out into public. Strangely enough, she has sex with a stranger only to strangle him to death during the act. Why? Influences from her past, perhaps? Or does Dorian Gray have some sort of sexual mystical effect? And this might be the very first glimpse of a point of Dorian Gray. I'm not sure if it's become too late, or they're trying to tie him into Dracula, but Dorian Gray finally has something to do. His influence is felt, and if you've seen previews for next week's episode, he has perhaps a dark side as well, which I would like to see. Ethan Chandler goes with Vanessa out of London. An interesting thought. He's talking about the Lord of the Manor and servants, perhaps hints of Sir John Talbot. Is Ethan Lawrence Talbot? I find it possible, but I'm not sure if John Logan's going to hit that directly on the head. However, I trust Logan in his decisions, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate to go all Universal all the time. Caliban is in the background episode, but yes, he sees Lily out with Dorian Gray, and the consequences of that will certainly be felt next week. We talk about kindness, we talk about friendships, and it evolves a lot, especially with Sembeni, Ethan, and Vanessa. We see Sembeni almost trying to explode. Sembeni knows the mysticism of it. He knows about Ethan's lycanthropy, and he doesn't condemn him for it. In fact, he gives Ethan the opportunity to think of it as perhaps a blessing. So, the dark side of it. Vanessa once again sees Mr. Poole, who, if you remember, killed the cutwife and burned her to death outside of the cabin. Well, Ethan doesn't want Vanessa to kill him. Vanessa needs revenge. What does she do? She opens the bad book, speaks a language which sounds dangerously close to the Verbus Diablo, and he is torn apart by his own dogs. And the end of the episode has perhaps the best quote in it, period. And it comes from Ethan Chandler. The quote is, "You will never get your soul back. Not ever. Welcome to the night, Vanessa." So with that, let's peel back some layers. John Logan is throwing Dracula right in our faces. One of the first clues you may not glean, but pay attention. In the Cutwife's house, there is a symbol with an eagle on it. That eagle is very similar to the one used in the very beginning scene of Horror of Dracula in 1958, as well as others in the Hammer productions. Mr. Lyle and Victor Frankenstein talk about prophecy, the Hound of God, the Scorpion, and the Demon endlessly circling one another. The Hound of God, the werewolf, is supposedly dangerous to Demon. Victor connects the word vampire to demon. Mr. Poole is torn apart by dogs. If you recall in Dracula, specifically Chapter 3, the anguished mother whose baby was stolen by Dracula, monster give me my child, they are throwing it in your face. If by now you don't realize that Dracula is 1, coming, and 2, his presence is everywhere in this show, I don't know how else to convince you. Another interesting thing. Ethan says that perhaps Vanessa will make someone a great little wifey one day because of her shooting, her cooking, and her diversity. Is he talking about Dracula or Ethan himself? Ethan and Vanessa get close, but Vanessa doesn't want to embrace her dark side, but she does so out of vengeance. What does that say? I love the episode. I don't have problems with it. It is, again, the best episode yet. I don't even have problems with Dorian Gray's character this episode because he has something to do. And for that, I am thankful. Is it too late for Dorian Gray? Not sure. But hopefully we'll see some of that next time. We'll also see the consequences, and we're also going to see a bit more of Sembeni and what is going on behind him. Oh, and by the way, excellent news. Penny Dreadful has been renewed for Season 3.
When we had the premiere in New York, put this in my book, for my birthday actually, I didn't want to go because I don't like seeing myself on the screen. I hate it. And I was forced to go because that was why I was there. I don't know whether it was a midnight showing, but it was a late night showing, basically for actors and actresses and directors and people who worked in the theatre to come and see after they'd finished their shows. That was the idea. I sat there and this crowd started coming in until the cinema was full. And some of them were well and truly tanked up. I don't know what they thought they were going to see. And the lights went down. Woo! The lights went down, the curtains parted, and the certificate came on. And then there's the famous shot of the stone coffin with the word written on the side and the drops of blood. And they went berserk because they knew what was going to happen eventually. And eventually, of course, there's the famous shot when Jonathan Harker, played by the late John Van Eysen, senses and turns around, and there's this silhouette at the top of the stairs, and the roof lifted. Roars of applause, cheering away like mad, laughing themselves silly, by which time I was under the seat.
We hope you enjoyed our subcast, Casting Dread, the Penny Dreadful Show. Don't forget Sundays, 10 p.m. showtime. Tear it up with Penny Dreadful. You can't go wrong. And now it's time to get into the media review portion of our show, or as Professor Van Helsing calls it,
The ghastly paraphernalia of our beneficial trade.
Maybe we should rename Professor Van Helsing Captain Awesome. Because there's nothing more awesome when Van Helsing gets on a tangent, is there? Well, the man himself is back. John Johnson is here for part 4 of our 8-part history into yesteryear and briefing of the Universal Monsters franchise. We'll start with The Raven right now.
This next film, there might be some points of disagreement because I love it. I love it even more than The Mummy. I love it even more than The Invisible Man, but not as much as Dracula 1931. Mm-hmm. It was directed by Louis Friedlander in 1935, and the film is The Raven.
The Raven, another one, and it is a good movie.
Talk about what you don't like and what you do like.
I have the same objection.
Okay.
What I do like is I like the performances, the settings. Performances are absolutely wonderful. I don't like the fact of using Poe when it's not a Poe film.
Audiences might not understand this about me, but I'm not a Poe guy. I'm not necessarily a horror guy. I'm a guy from crime who happens to love Dracula and the brushes painted by the horror genre in general. But what drew me in to this film is the performance of Bela Lugosi.
Bela's awesome in this.
You got to see his strength.
Yes.
His range as an actor. He is mad. Mm-hmm. It's such an evocative piece as Dr. Richard Vollen.
Well, poor Bela got the shaft. He really got the shaft in later films. He became one of the first, I believe, to be what we call typecast. And people expected Dracula, after that. And he was given some opportunities early on. We're talking about these in the early 30s. But later on, it seemed like all of these were swept under the rug, and Dracula was the only thing Bela could do. And he's very underrated. These films, granted, I'm not saying to not see these films. I'm just saying don't go into it thinking if you're a Poe fan, don't go into it thinking that you're going to see Edgar Allan Poe, because you're not. But do go and see these films for Bela not as Dracula, to see what else he can do.
Talk about Bela bringing the madness. He does it in this film.
Yeah.
It is gorgeous. The special effects were kind of but it really doesn't matter because Boris Karloff is another tragic figure, but it also takes place in the house. There's beautiful music. It's such a wonderful piece. I give this a resounding 2 thumbs up. It is one of my favorite films of all time because of the way it instills with the viewer. It's another one of those films that doesn't get the recognition that it deserves.
That's true.
In no way, shape, or form does it resemble Poe. But for me, that's a good thing. For you, it's a bad thing.
Well, you know.
But for me, it's a wonderful thing because it's totally different. And the remake of The Raven with John Cusack could take a lesson from this. But I absolutely give it 2 thumbs up. Would you recommend it as a film?
I would recommend both of them, actually.
Really?
I would recommend them on their own merits.
Okay.
You know, you need. I think that anyone that is a fan of horror and of this particular time period in early Universal horror, if they haven't seen these, they need to.
But here's a challenge. Are there any of these films, save perhaps the 25 version of Phantom of the Opera, that stick to its original material?
No. There's not. Really and truly, there's not. At that time, I think we discussed a little bit ago, with Dracula, at that time they couldn't have filmed, you know, something that was 100% Stoker or Mary Shelley or what have you. Matter of fact, even down, if we want to talk Frankenstein for just a moment, even the whole lab scene within that movie is not Mary Shelley. I mean, it's completely different than what she ever envisioned, I'm sure.
Speaking of which, the same year, 1935, James Whale is back.
Ah, yes.
For the first sequel in this whole span of the Universal franchise. And some people say it's the defining film of the whole genre. It's 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein.
Ah, The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, this is a wonderful film. We open in this film by seeing the young Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley talking about this tale that she has crafted, because all these grown men, including her husband Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, are there, and they're all talking about how that little mind could think up something as dark as Frankenstein. So she then proceeds to tell the story of what happened next. And of course, you know, she's played by Elsa Lanchester, who comes back a little later on in the film, and in another character, well, 2 characters. Great film, great film. We're introduced to Dr. Pretorius, who's a very fascinating character, who kind of goads Henry along. That always bothered me, Henry instead of Victor. But, you know, you got through it.
You did. One interesting tidbit about Dr. Pretorius, he was actually the first openly gay character portrayed in horror cinema. And the next year, there was also another pseudo-type of homosexual trope that was touched in Dracula's Daughter. But this film is really sad. It's tragic. Again, it talks about damaged people and where they want to go. They recast Elizabeth, and actually I think her performance was better.
I agree. And somebody else, Lawrence, that you see as well, calling down to her husband, Hans at the mill, is Mary Gordon.
Dr. Pretorius.
Yes, Dr. Pretorius. But Mary Gordon, you know who she would later go on to portray in 12 films for Universal? Mrs. Hudson in the Sherlock Holmes series. So you get to see Mrs. Hudson, which is always great for me, being a Holmes fan as well. It's a great film. You've got some great actors that are filling cameo parts and so forth. Carradine's in this one as well as one of the hunters. You hear the monster speak. But when you're talking about the monster himself and this being a tale about people, the monster wants love. He wants somebody to call his own.
One of the saddest scenes I've ever seen in cinema history, and it's so moving. And this is really why we do this podcast. We talk about value. We talk about elements which really matter.
Yeah.
Friendship, kindness. But one of the most moving scenes I've ever seen in anything takes place in this film, where the blind man is praying and thanking God for a friend.
Yes.
Friendship.
As Ave Maria comes
sweet
up
that
in
is.
crescendo, yeah.
That can't be understated.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful scene, and it will bring a tear to your eye. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong with you.
That by itself, and this was in 1935, that by itself, you should watch the whole franchise just for that moment.
Yeah.
That moment by itself is going to, it lives forever. It's often imitated and never replicated.
Right.
Never. Because of that and so much more, because James Whale was pushing the censors, because he took a step up with a bigger budget. I absolutely give this a thumbs up and a seal of approval.
Oh, absolutely.
Another one, Universal, that's another notch under their belt.
Yeah.
They continue to tear it up.
We hope you enjoyed part 4 of our trip into yesteryear, part 4 of 8 of our history of the Universal Monsters franchise. Don't forget to tune in next week for part 5 and also a continuation of Penny Dreadful. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the tribute for Christopher Lee is coming. It's difficult to process still, really. I'm very saddened still. Such a lasting legacy. Once again, thankfully, that's one of the reasons why movies exist. It's one of the great reasons why we love film and television and books. And all media, really, is because regardless of what you do, or what kind of life, however short or long it may be, that your work lasts forever. And perhaps that's some of the reasons why I go into Dracula itself. Because I don't want to be forgotten. Perhaps it's ego? I'm not sure. But in any case, thank you, Christopher Lee. Your tribute is coming, and I hope we do you even the smallest semblance of justice. And with that is the end of our episode. But before we go, we'll leave you with some words from the man himself.
Now, the wind blows coldly through the broken battlements. Though this is my home, I must move on.